Cluster munitions are banned in 123 countries because the bomblets they release don't always explode immediately. This creates a lethal, unpredictable threat to civilians that can last decades. So why has President Joe Biden given Ukraine cluster bombs to help fight off Russian forces? Well, the US isn't on that list of countries. Cluster munitions, or cluster bombs, are weapons that open in the air and release anywhere from dozens to hundreds of bomblets over a targeted area. The dud rate, or failure rate, of these bomblets measures how likely they are to not detonate on impact.
What we're finding is in countries such as La PDR, is that children who weren't even born when the cluster bombs were dropped are being hurt by the remnants that they find from that conflict 50 years ago.
Mary Wareham is the advocacy director of the Arms Division of Human Rights Watch. She's been working to prohibit cluster munitions for nearly 2 decades.
So the US has been quite careful to characterize this transfer of cluster munitions as a stopgap measure, as a bridge while more unitary rounds of artillery are manufactured as quickly as possible and sent to the conflict. And they're talking about how they've scoured the warehouses around the world for more of these artillery projectiles that the Ukrainians really need, and they don't have any. Therefore, the next thing they could reach for was cluster munitions. We're kind of shocked that cluster munitions would even be on the list.
And some of that shock is because new cluster munitions haven't been made in the US in nearly a decade.
There's no talk about the US restarting cluster munition production as a result of this transfer's decision. The focus is on the stockpiles, and the US was supposed to destroy those stockpiles because Pentagon's own studies and documents show that the submunitions have a high failure rate, that they are inappropriate in modern warfare.
A stockpile analysis released by the Pentagon in 2002 found that some of these bomblets had a dud rate of more than 14%. That's much higher than the 2.35% or less dud rate the Pentagon is claiming now. Ukraine has already used its own limited supply of cluster munitions in the past. And National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told NPR that Russia is already using cluster bombs, which means the US will start demining the area after the war anyway.
It's just so insulting to the clearance organizations who work to clear cluster munition remnants. This is slow, painstaking, costly, dangerous work. It's just incredibly frustrating to hear that, well, the US will just throw more money at mine clearance in Ukraine to ensure that the remnants are cleared in the future. And that worries the 50, 60, 70 other countries that have also got landmines and unexploded ordnance in the ground. They're worried that the Ukraine response will suck up all of the international assistance and funding that is out there for mine clearance globally, and it's not a big amount of money.
The Biden administration isn't finding a lot of support in D.C. either. After the announcement on July 7th, 19 members of the House of Representatives issued a statement urging the president to reconsider. Representatives Ilhan Omar and Sarah Jacobs co-sponsored a proposal to amend the National Defense Authorization Act to stop the U.S. from sending cluster munitions to other countries, but it ultimately failed. And polling by the Associated Press from January 2023 found that only 48% of adults in the U.S. support sending weapons to Ukraine at all. That's down 12% from May 2022, a few months after the war began. President Biden is committed to support Ukraine in the war against Russia as long as it takes. But are there ethical boundaries on what that support looks like? Is it possible to keep Russian President Vladimir Putin out of Ukraine and maintain a livable region for Ukrainians to return to?